You know, when we think about history, our minds usually jump to famous kings, legendary generals, and these huge world-changing battles. But today, we're going to dive into a story where the hero, well, he isn't a warrior at all. He's a bureaucrat, a guy whose name is pretty much lost to time, but whose obsession with following the rules ended up deciding the fate of an empire's promise. This is basically a detective story, set 2,500 years ago, a story all about paperwork, procedure, and power.
Okay, so picture this. The year is 520 BC. We're in Jerusalem, a city that's just starting to get back on its feet. The Jewish people have recently returned from a long exile in Babylon, and for them, rebuilding their temple, the Second Temple, is everything. It's a symbol of hope, a fresh start, a future. But then, just as the walls start to go up, everything grinds to a halt. Imperial officials show up and they've got one simple question, but it's a question that has the full crushing weight of the Persian Empire behind it. Who gave you permission?
And not one question kicks off our entire story. Now, this wasn't some casual inquiry. This was the start of an official investigation, basically an audit. The challenge came from guys whose entire job was to enforce the law of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which, you have to remember, was the biggest, most organized empire the world had ever seen. The whole future of the temple now hangs on the answer to that question.
So let's meet the men asking the questions. We've got Tatnay, he's the regional governor, and with him is a high-ranking official named Shaturbuzanai. Now, it is absolutely crucial to get this part. These guys weren't the villains here. They weren't trying to crush a holy project out of spite. They were something far more powerful, in a way. They were auditors. Their job was to make sure that every single project in this very strategic part of the empire was legal, documented, and had the proper sign-off. They were just doing their job.
So, faced with this official challenge, what do the builders say? They come back with this absolutely stunning, incredibly bold answer. They claim their permission didn't come from some local official, or even from the king who was currently on the throne. Nope, their permission came from the founder of the Persian Empire himself, a legendary figure who had been dead for years, Cyrus the Great. And just like that, this simple audit about a building permit explodes into a high-stakes historical mystery. Can a promise from a dead king still be law?
To really get what happens next, you have to understand the system Shaturbuzanai worked for. The Persian Empire wasn't just held together with armies and force. It was a remarkably sophisticated machine. An empire built on incredible roads, a postal service, standardized weights, and, most importantly for our story, an obsession with law and record-keeping.
This whole investigation was happening in a province called Eber, Nari, which literally means beyond the river being the Great Euphrates. And this place was no quiet backwater. It was a vital strategic corridor. It was the land bridge connecting the Persian heartland to the incredible wealth of Egypt and all those trading ports on the Mediterranean. Any unauthorized building project here, especially something as big as a temple, was a major issue of imperial security. The Persians did not leave things to chance in Eber Nari.
So Satarbuzanai wasn't just winging it. He was following protocol, what the Persians called data, or the king's law. And it was a really clear four-step process. Step 1, audit anything that looks unauthorized. Step 2, verify the claims by demanding to see the official paperwork. Step 3, if there's no paperwork on site, you consult the central archives. And finally, Step 4, you enforce whatever the current king decides based on the evidence. It was a system built to maintain order across a massive, sprawling empire.
So now, the entire case rests on finding a ghost in the imperial archives. The builders have made this wild claim, and our bureaucrat, Shaturbuzanai, is following the procedure. But to really feel the weight of this claim, we gotta go back in time. Who exactly was Cyrus the Great, and what did he promise?
I mean, Cyrus was a genuine game changer in the ancient world. You can see his incredible rise here, from a minor king to the ruler of a massive empire. But what made him great wasn't just winning battles, it was his policies. After he conquered the legendary city of Babylon in 539 BC, he did something that was totally unheard of. Instead of enslaving the people who'd been held captive there, he let them go home. He let them go back to their own lands and worship their own gods.
And this wasn't just some general policy, it applied directly to the Jewish people. Historical records, like the writings of the historian Josephus, capture the heart of Cyrus's decree. He didn't just let them leave. He gave them explicit, official permission to go back to Jerusalem for the very specific purpose of rebuilding their temple. This was the legal document, the authorization that the builders were banking on.
And here's the real kicker. This is the detail that changes everything. Cyrus didn't just give them permission. The historical sources are clear. He also promised to pay for it out of the imperial treasury. This wasn't just a friendly gesture, this was a state-sponsored, fully funded project. It was a binding contract between the Persian crown and this community. Okay, so let's jump back to our investigator, Shaturbuzanai, in 520 BC. He's heard this incredible claim from the builders. So, following the data, the king's law, he and Governor Tatnay do everything by the book. They write up a formal letter, not some back-channel gossip, but an official memo, and they send it up the chain of command to the new king, Darius I. The letter lays out the whole situation and makes a simple request. Can you please search the royal archives and see if this decree from Cyrus actually exists?
And here you see the imperial machine working just as it was designed. The inquiry goes up, the request is processed, and King Darius orders a search. And somewhere, deep in the royal records, they find it. A scroll. The verdict comes all the way back down the chain of command. The claim is true. Cyrus really did make this decree. The order to Shaturbuzanai is simple. Do not obstruct this work, let it continue. Case closed, right? The builders were right all along. But this is where the story takes a turn nobody saw coming.
What King Darius does next is the single most shocking, most revealing moment in this entire story. He could have just said, let them build, and that would have been that. His legal duty was done, but he adds one more command, just one, and it completely changes the game for the very men who started this whole investigation.
Darius doesn't just reaffirm the old decree. He orders Shaturbuzanay and Governor Tatnay to actively fund the entire project out of the taxes from their own province. Now, just think about that for a second. The auditors who showed up to shut this thing down are now legally required to become its main financial sponsors. The state wasn't just permitting the project anymore. It was now enforcing its own obligation to pay for it.
So that brings us to the ultimate question. Why? Why on earth would Darius do this? Why force his own government to spend its money on a temple for a subject people based on a dusty old scroll? Well, the answer gets to the very heart of the philosophy, the operating system really, that held the entire Persian Empire together.
For the Persian kings, who often followed the Zoroastrian faith, the entire universe was a constant battle between two forces. On one side, you had Asha, that's cosmic order, truth, righteousness. And on the other, you had Drush, that's chaos, deceit, and the lie. A king's most sacred duty was to be a champion for Asha here on earth, to create order, uphold the truth, and fight against chaos. And a legally recorded decree, a promise made by the king, was the literal embodiment of Asha.
So to ignore that decree, to go back on a past king's word, would be to embrace drich. It would be an act of the lie that would invite chaos into the empire. For the Persians, a king's promise wasn't just a political statement that expired when he did. It was a sacred contract that was binding on the throne itself forever. So when Darius found that scroll from Cyrus, he wasn't just looking at an old piece of policy. He was looking at a sacred promise, and upholding it, even at a significant cost, was his fundamental duty. He was literally maintaining the order of the cosmos.
So in the end, the story of this forgotten bureaucrat, Satarbuzanai, shows us what the true foundation of Persian power really was. Yeah, the armies were strong, but the empire's real strength came from its profound commitment to law, to memory, and to order. A commitment so absolute that a piece of parchment from a long-dead king had the power to compel a living one, to turn his own investigators into investors. It just goes to show you, sometimes the most powerful weapon an empire has isn't a sword. It's a record, filed away correctly in an archive, just waiting to be found.